everybody. We're back. We're delighted to have Congresswoman Michele Bachmann from Minnesota here. She was elected in 2006, the first Republican woman from Minnesota, and
doesn't happen every day.
A champion for conservative values, limiting the growth of government and cutting taxes. So we're delighted to have her here. She's going to make a few remarks, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for everybody being here this morning. And we have food even at Chick-fil-A. So we have no Chick-fil-A's in Minnesota, so this will be an awesome opportunity. We've got great food. I appreciate it. But I want to get to your questions right away. But I think, the thing that we're all focusing on today will be the President's remarks that he'll be giving tonight. And it looks like an absolute opportunism moment for the President to try and advance the next stage of his legislative agenda. And I think the curious feature in all of this has been, this is a disaster, a major disaster. And yet it seems like every response that's been coming out of the White House has been about the President rather than about the disaster. That is odd to me. That seems extremely odd. And it seems like a dereliction of leadership, especially if you consider what happened in Nashville was also a disaster, an unmitigated disaster for the people down in Nashville. Not only has the President not yet visited Nashville to highlight the devastation that happened to businesses and people's lives there, but he also hasn't even mentioned Nashville as a disaster. That's interesting to me, that the White House seems to be picking and choosing between disasters and what they think for whatever reason, and I can't speculate what that reason would be, but for some reason Nashville didn't make the cut for a presidential visit or for a presidential mention. And now if you look at what's going on down in the Gulf, there's differing opinions. Some people say it took 9 days for the President to make it down to the Gulf. Some people said, 12 days before he got engaged. Doesn't matter. The point is, the present button was being hit for a while, and now it seems like the only thing that the President's going to bring out of this, other than sending out Eric Holder down there to scare the bejeebers out of BP, I mean, think of what that would mean to a company like BP. The President has it within his purview to be able to take over control of that disaster. He chose not to. He chose to allow BP to be the ones to run that response. Maybe that was the right decision. I'm not necessarily questioning that. But then the hypocrisy seems to me to nonstop criticize BP when the President actually could have brought the authority back to himself. But he chose not to do that. But in the midst of all that, we haven't seen a lot of cooperation from the government. For instance, we weren't able to get documentation from the Minerals and Management Service. I know one of my colleagues, Louis Gohmert, in committee was questioning and found out that the only department that was unionized was the one that was involved with inspections of the platforms. And the last team to go out and inspect the platform, there's always two people that go so that one can look over the other's shoulder to make sure that one watcher is watching the other watcher. Well, the one thing we found out is that it was a father-son team that went out as the last review team. So how, do you think there might be a conflict of interest there? Number one, they're unionized. Number two, it's a father-son team. Not that they couldn't be watching each other, but it's questions. It's asking questions. And yet, it appears what we're going to hear tonight is a call for more legislation. The President just called for creating a fund that would be administered by outsiders, which would be more of a redistribution of wealth fund. And then now it appears that we're going to be looking at yet one more gateway for more government control, more money to government. If there's a disaster, why is it that government is the one who always seems to benefit after a disaster? And that's, of course, what cap and trade would be, to give more power and more money to the federal government. When are we ever going to talk about actually capping this hole and doing whatever it takes to make sure that you cap the hole? That's it. And quite honestly, for over 50 days, that should be the only story that we write about and that we talk about for over 50 days. What is the next engineering genius that we could bring on board to actually cap the hole? That's it. I mean, there is, we can talk about restitution, we can talk about all the rest, but right now it is capping the hole. You've watched all the stories. I mean, who doesn't want to reach through that television screen and grab one of those pelicans and adopt your own pelican and, clean the thing off and give it life and give it CPR and whatever you got to do? I mean, it's just tragic. It breaks your heart to see this devastation, let alone the devastation, obviously, economically, that's being incurred by the people down there. So there's a lot of things that we could talk about that, but I think that the number one thing that just strikes me is that it seems that every response that's come out of the White House, and it's in excess of 50 days, has been about the White House. It's been about them. It doesn't seem like it's really been about stopping the hole and dealing with the devastation that's going on down at the Gulf. So there you have it. We can go ahead and open it up.
Great, thank you.
Is that what you wanted?
That's perfect.
Did I earn my Chick-fil-A? And a brownie. This is better than I thought. Oh my God.
We got to get some of them in Minnesota. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to lead off and take the first question. Florida Republicans have been asking, Jeff Miller, one of your colleagues, has asked him to waive the Jones Act. Now, President Bush did this during Katrina, and this would allow, foreign oil skimmers to come into the Gulf of Mexico. Today, Robert Gibbs said they haven't received a single request to do this, yet the Washington Post yesterday seemed to contradict that. Can you talk about perhaps why he's unwilling to do this? And, I mean, what your thoughts are on it?
Well, again, I don't know other than speculation, but it seems to me that the president has wanted to keep all of the focus on BP, or in his words, British Petroleum. He wants to make sure you know it's British Petroleum. That's where he wants to keep the focus. There's other companies that have offered help. The White House has said no thanks. There's other countries that came out right away and said, we'll be happy to send vessels, we'll be happy to do whatever we can to help you, thanks but no thanks. That again seems bizarre to me. It seems like the best thing that you could do is get, a table like this together and bring the most brilliant minds that you can together and find the solution to cap the leak. That's what you should do. And to get the skimmers in and whatever, and then to find out that there really wasn't a good plan, a viable plan in place to deal with all this. I think absolutely the president from the very beginning, these offers were made from day one from other countries to come in and help. And again, it's in excess of 50 days. The big shocker story last week was that the president hadn't yet found the time in his schedule to pick the phone up and call the CEO of BP. That was a shock when that story came out. Here he was criticizing, calling for the resignation of this guy, and then, excuse me, but the lame excuse was, well, the CEO is controlled by a board of directors. Newsflash, this happens all the time. CEOs are usually governed by board of directors. Well then, for crumb's sake, if you don't want to meet with a CEO, meet with a board of directors. Meet with somebody, but they've been very good at pointing fingers and just not doing something. It's almost like you would wonder if this was a pretext, Shazam, to have cap and trade come forward. So I don't know. Yeah.
Do you foresee BP being able to shoulder the burden here of actually taking on not only capping it, but affording everything? And if not, what kind of liability can the American people expect for the damages associated with the oil spill?
I hope the latter question will be none, absolutely zero, because I think if we attend to this and get on top of this, I think that it won't bring BP down. That shouldn't be the purpose. The purpose shouldn't be to just destroy oil companies. And I'm not here as a shill for an oil company. I'm just saying I don't think that's what the purpose should be, to either nationalize oil companies or to take them down. But I think that BP, hopefully, the calls have all been made, and they have said that they will pay for every bit of the cleanup. But again, I think that we have processes already available, whether it's through claims courts, bankruptcies. I mean, there's a lot of different venues that we can go through for people to make claims. And so it was imprudent, I think, for the president to say that he wanted to create this new system when we already have systems in place to deal with claims. And it shouldn't be for the president to collect anecdotal stories. That's what he said that he was doing. He was collecting stories. That's not the job of the president, to be out being the keeper of the stories and then delivering those stories to BP. That's what courts are for. And so it just seems like there's a complete misreading by the White House of the appropriate procedures that you go through. This has happened before. Disasters have happened before. We do have procedures set up. It just, again, I go back to, I guess, my main point, which is, it doesn't seem like the White House understands that the main duty is cap this hole. stem the tide. This is a disaster. Do whatever you can do to bring this to bear, to end this thing, and then deal with the cleanup. Why in the world would you tell Bobby Jindal of Louisiana for weeks on end, you need a permit, you need a study from the EPA? No, what you need to do is contain the damage. You've got wetlands, you've got animal life, you've got marine life, you've got economics of scale to deal with here. You've got a real problem on your hands. And it just doesn't seem like they've been able to understand the priorities that need to be mitigated in this situation.